Tonight, in this election, you, the American people, reminded us that while our road has been hard, while our journey has been long, we have picked ourselves up. We have fought our way back. And we know in our hearts that for the United States of America, the best is yet to come.
Voters give President Barack Obama 4 more years in the White House. I'm Marcus Mabry, and you're watching the New York Times. We'll look at the foreign policy challenges that remain for Barack Obama's second term and examine some victories for supporters of same-sex marriage. But first, I'm joined by Michael Shear for an overview of the election night and what the results mean for governing. Michael, thank you so much for being here with us.
Certainly.
Did you sleep last night?
Not much, but nobody did, right? Everybody was up watching the speech.
How did Obama do it? We expected a long night. It was not really as long as we expected it to be. How did Obama do it, and where did Romney fail?
Well, look, I think all along these last, say, 6 weeks, both sides were telling a story about how they thought the electorate would look and what they thought turnout was going to be. Both sides accused the other one of bluffing, right. And it looks like the Obama people were the ones not bluffing. I mean, whether or not the Romney folks were, the Obama folks said, look, it's going to be an electorate that's going to look like 2008. There's going to be the same proportion of minorities, of women, of young people, or something close enough to get us over. And we have this big turnout operation that's been, up and running for years, and we're going to get all these people, we're going to bring them to the polls, and they're going to re-elect the president. And that's what happened.
Mm-hmm. What now, though? Because in some ways, and we talked about gridlock in Washington. If it's actually conceivable, and for many people it's not, we may have even greater gridlock in Washington, looking at the fact that the president returns to the White House, the Democrats actually gain seats in the Senate, and then the Republicans, keep their House majority, and some of those people taking those Republican seats in the House are actually more conservative than the people who are leaving.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that you already saw the suggestion by House Speaker John Boehner that, hey, well, we won also because they won seats, they kept their majority. Looming in the next 6 weeks, 8 weeks is the fiscal cliff. They've got to deal with the Bush tax cuts, whether or not to extend those. And interestingly, I found it interesting that John Boehner, the Speaker of the House, and the President did not speak last night. Nobody, Mr. Boehner didn't call, as far as we know, to congratulate him. The President didn't reach out to the Speaker. So you already start off again in the middle of this big stalemate that we've been in politically, and it doesn't look like it's going to get any better.
Well, one of the things the President talked about last night in his speech coming out acknowledging his reelection was he talked about being humbled by the whole process of this election. Let's listen a little bit now to what he talked about and what he hopes it will mean for governing.
A long campaign is now over. And whether I earned your vote or not, I have listened to you. I have learned from you. And you've made me a better president. And with your stories and your struggles, I return to the White House more determined and more inspired than ever about the work there is to do and the future that lies ahead. Tonight, you voted for action, not politics as usual. You elected us to focus on your jobs, not ours. And in the coming weeks and months, I am looking forward to reaching out and working with leaders of both parties to meet the challenges we can only solve together. Reducing our deficit, reforming our tax code, fixing our immigration system, freeing ourselves from foreign oil. We've got more work to do.
So, Michael, the president says he's looking forward to reaching out to leaders from both parties. Do you believe that?
Well, of course, he's going to say that. That's the time to say that is now. Substantively, I think that that they sure they're gonna try to reach agreement on some of the big issues that are confronting them, but stylistically and tonally, I think that's the question of whether or not we have a change. I mean, the president has has said, and his people have said, look, in the second term, if we get one, we're going to, not be kind of trapped in Washington as much, and in the legislative process, we're going to go out to the public. We're going to get the public to sort of rally behind our positions, and in the hopes that that changes the tone. But
that sounds like a promise, and also maybe a threat to House Republicans, meaning we'll try to go around you and go straight to your constituents, or even to Republican governors.
I think that's right. I absolutely think that's right, and I think that's one of the lessons that the president took from the first term, is that he got too buried in the details of legislative negotiating back and forth. And look, if it turns out the Senate, the Democrats have picked up a couple of seats, and in the House, the Republicans did better. The Democrats did not do. They wanted to make a lot of gains, they didn't. Then that means that Congress is going to be even that much more divided, and it's going to take something to break the gridlock. And I think the president hopes the public is that.
You talked about the fiscal cliff. Where exactly now can Democrats find room to compromise right now, immediately, and where can Republicans find room to give right now, if they want to?
Look, I think people on both sides have looking substantively at the sort of fiscal issues that are facing us, have said the path to compromise is pretty obvious if the parties can get there. The Democrats are going to have to give on some spending cuts, especially cuts to things that they don't necessarily like Medicare, and the Republicans are going to have to give a little bit on taxes, and
at least for the wealthy.
Taxes for the wealthy, exactly right. And if they can sort of each make those compromises, and who knows, the elections are powerful things, and they do send messages. And even if there's some bravado from the Republicans and John Boehner right now saying, well, we won too, and we're not going to, this is not a mandate to raise taxes, they're all going to say that. But at the end of the day, they recognize that the American people have spoken, and it could lead to some kind of compromise along the lines of the Simpson-Bowles Commission, which is sort of, suggested a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and we can put it together and we can get it done.
Speaking of messages from elections, what's the message that this election sends to the Republican Party? We've heard this phrase that the Republican Party is the madman party in a country that's a modern family country.
It's a great phrase. Because it captures, I think, pretty well the demographic challenge that is facing the party, not just in the next months or year, but over the next decade. This is a country. You look at places along in Florida, along the I-4 corridor, in Virginia, in Ohio, places that the Republicans really struggled. And part of what has happened is that there's lots more Hispanics. There's a growing Asian community. There's more active young people. There's women who are more participating in the political process, and all of those are constituencies that the Republicans don't do particularly well with.
Latinos were white voters were 74% of the electorate last time, only 72% this time,
and it's headed in that direction. And so the party, and look, there are lots of voices within the Republican Party. This isn't a sort of critique from the outside. There's lots of voices from within the Republican Party that have been saying and will get louder over the next weeks, we have to figure a way to not be so strident on immigration policy, to not be so strident on gay rights issues, to not be so strident on issues that women care about in particular. And if we don't figure that out as a party, the Republicans are going to are going to face the challenges that they face in this election, which is that you just can't get enough people to win.
Final question, 2016, the race starts today. Who are your favorites?
Please, the race doesn't start today. It can't possibly. No. On the Democratic side, you sort of, you wonder whether Joe Biden,
Barack Obama's first call last night, reportedly after the concession call from Mitt Romney, was to Bill Clinton to say thank you.
Well, thank you, exactly. So you've got Hillary Clinton that might run. You've got Joe Biden that could run on the Republican side. You have people like Marco Rubio in the wings, Jeb Bush possibly in the wings, Chris Christie, of course, Paul Ryan, who obviously made a big name for himself. So we'll see.
All right. Well, thanks so much for being here, and we look forward to watching this all with you as the months unfold. We're going to turn now to overseas. Some things didn't change on election night, including the foreign policy challenges that the administration faces. For more on that, we go to Mark Landler, who's standing by in our newsroom. Mark, how are you?
I'm well, thanks, Marcus. How are you?
I'm good. I'm hanging in there. So the biggest foreign policy issue clearly facing the president, and for some reason you wonder, how happy is he to really be back in office, is Iran. This is a question that it's immediate. Israel has said that they will not, for a matter of a few more months perhaps, tolerate Iran proceeding along a path that the West believes will lead it toward nuclear weapons. That's the first challenge the president faces, right?
Yeah, that's easily his top priority. You know, many of the big foreign policy challenges were effectively put on a shelf by the White House over the past year. The president didn't really want to take risks or gamble on foreign policy for understandable reasons. But Iran is the one that he's going to have to address right away. And the way he's likely to do that is by engaging the Iranian government in direct bilateral talks. This is something that my colleague Helene Cooper and I reported a few weeks ago, and the White House disputed that a meeting had been set. But the president himself confirmed in the third presidential debate that bilateral talks were his policy. It's seen by everybody as an inevitable last step before the U.S., Israel, or a coalition of countries has to contemplate taking military action to forcibly curb the Iranian nuclear program. So, you know, some experts are telling me that we may see this diplomatic opening within the next 6 months.
Syria, another problem ongoing, the civil war there. What does the administration do? How does it support the rebels? Any idea of how that's going to go?
Well, here again, the president has been reluctant, partly for political reasons, to get entangled in Syria. But here the strategic reservations are also significant on his part. He really does believe that arming the rebels would militarize the conflict further. So I think he will try to find other ways to try to broker a deal to maybe give safe passage to Bashar Assad, the president of Syria, to get him out of the country. There are countries in the region like Turkey that are getting ever more anxious about Syria. So I think the president will be forced to act. But here it will be interesting to see what he does, because he continues to have deep reservations about some of the steps that many people, including Mitt Romney during the election, advocated.
What about Afghanistan? You have American soldiers in harm's way there, withdrawal happening, obviously. What does that do for the president?
Well, the president promised in this campaign that he would wind down the war in Afghanistan. He's going to stick to that promise. The issue is, how do you accelerate a drawdown of troops without allowing the country you leave behind to lapse into chaos? That's always been the dilemma with Afghanistan. But I think you will see the president redouble his efforts to wind down that war and perhaps try to figure out ways, other ways to build up enough stability so the security handoff that they've talked about in 2014 can go off relatively well. It's not going to be an easy retreat. It'll probably be a messy one, but there's no way it's going to slow down now.
The most significant long-term foreign policy question, of course, is China and its rise. Right now, the Chinese Communist Party is having its Congress to elect, deciding its new leadership, new generation of leaders in China. What's the president's China policy? Some would say he hasn't had much of a China policy so far.
Well, I think there's going to be a sort of a watch and wait element to China policy for at least the next few months. Xi Jinping is scheduled to become the new paramount leader in China. But this has been a very difficult leadership transition for the Chinese. They've had scandals. They've had a lot of allegations of corruption, some reported in our own newspaper. So I think the administration is going to want to let the Chinese settle out their own internal arrangement before he engages again in a very robust way. But you're right, the strategic pivot to Asia is arguably the greatest long-term gamble that the president has placed, and the fact that he has 4 more years will allow him to really see that policy through and put a little flesh on the bones. One of the criticisms of the strategic pivot is there's a lot of talk here, but maybe a little less substance. Now the president's going to have time to put a little substance into this policy.
Final question, Mark. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton has made it clear she will not be Secretary of State in the second Obama term. Who will be Secretary of State?
Well, it's an interesting one, Marcus, and those of us who work in Washington are now going to lapse straight into the parlor game of guessing these kinds of things. There are 2 names that come up as front runners. Both have some problems attached to them. One is Senator Kerry, who handled debate prep for President Obama. He's the head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, long thought of as a front runner to be Secretary of State. The one wrinkle here is he also holds a Democratic Senate seat in Massachusetts. If he were to become Secretary of State, that seat would open up.
Scott Brown's still right there after losing.
Scott Brown is right there. Deval Patrick, the Democratic governor, is another alternative. So there may be ways around this, but Kerry's one. The other name you hear is Susan Rice, the UN ambassador, very close to President Obama. was a foreign policy advisor to him during the '08 campaign. Her issue is she was very prominent in giving the initial accounts of the administration's handling of the Benghazi incident in Libya, and some of the things she said proved later not to be the case. She was reading off what the administration said was the latest and valid intelligence at the time, but Republicans on the Hill have made a big deal about this, and she would almost certainly face an unfriendly confirmation hearing. Whether that's enough to derail her chances, only time will tell.
All right, Mark, thanks so much. We'll be watching it with you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Marcus.
Finally, there were some important victories for civil rights yesterday. Voters in Maine and Maryland approved same-sex marriage, while votes were being tallied in Minnesota and Washington on similar initiatives. Eric Ekholm has been following this issue for us, and he joins me now at the desk. Thanks so much for being here. All right, so where does it end in the end? Where are these initiatives falling out?
Yesterday was really a banner day for the gay rights movement. Never before have they won an election about gay marriage. It's been a common theme of the other side that whenever we put it to the voters, they reject gay marriage. And those 6 states in Washington, D.C. that have it, it was always imposed by a court or it was a legislative decision. So there were 4 elections yesterday. The gay rights advocates were hopeful of winning at least 1 or 2. Now it looks like we know they've won 3 and may even win the 4th.
Okay, so Minnesota is a question of...
Minnesota, no, in Minnesota it was slightly different. There was an effort to pass a constitutional amendment that marriage can only be between a man and a woman. And it was widely expected to pass, but it did not. It failed. So that's another victory for the gay rights movement. Out in the state of Washington, we don't have all the ballots in yet because it's a vote-by-mail system, but it's looking fairly promising, but it's too early to call. But
any idea of when we might have a result, or do we not even know?
In a day or two, I think. They've switched to all-mail voting, and people could send in their letters even yesterday. So they have to wait for all of that to come in. But in Maine, a fairly remarkable sign of the change in public opinion, I think, on this issue. Only 3 years ago, in a similar vote, voters rejected gay marriage. Last night, they, by a slightly healthy margin, accepted it. And so Maine became the 7th state, and now Maryland the 8th state to have legalized gay marriage.
What does it mean nationally, politically, for the Republican Party, where we actually saw the platform, at least, was very clear, clearly against gay marriage rights. What does it mean nationally if this is the way the country is trending?
Well, I think, as with many issues, there seems to be a trend in a direction away from the very hard line the Republican Party has taken. On the other hand, 30 states do have constitutional amendments barring gay marriage, but many of those were passed, 6, 8 years ago, and if public opinion is changing as fast as it appears to some people, you may start getting challenges, efforts to undo those amendments in states. Then also you have to look at what happens in the courts. There may be some very big cases coming before the Supreme Court that will affect the states.
Final question. Again, at the federal level, there is no reason. There is actually states do not have to recognize other states' same-sex marriage rights. That's going to clearly become before the court. Is that where this is going to finally play out?
Well, that particular aspect of the Defense of Marriage Act, if it's found unconstitutional, that won't force any state to adopt gay marriage. That DOMA, that law known as DOMA, has 2 aspects. One of them is states don't have to recognize other states' gay marriage, but the other part is that the federal government does not recognize same-sex marriage, and that's the part that is likely to be challenged this year. And
based on equal rights, we think, and gay couples having the same rights as straight couples.
It's not clear the court will be that sweeping. They could. They're also taking up the case of California's Proposition 8, which a federal district court has found is unconstitutional, and that would be the big one. If the court actually takes that on and says it is against our Constitution to discriminate against gay and lesbian people, that would be huge. I don't think many people don't expect them to go quite that far yet, but as you see the changes in the states and changing public opinion, the court tends to follow.
Excellent. Eric, thanks so much for being here and talking about it.
Thank
with us.
you.
That's it for me this morning, but we will return at 1 p.m. for another live update here at the New York Times. And as always, you can follow the action all day with us online. I'm Marcus Mabry. Thanks for watching the New York Times.